am Jessa Luxon from Own Electric in Florence, Kentucky. Welcome to Along Those Lines.
This episode's sponsor is IP Keys Power Partners, who wants you to know that IP Keys can help you to monetize, digitize, and futurize your AMI. Learn how you can realize greater economic returns at www.ipkeyspowerpartners.com.
Hi, everyone. This is a podcast about electric cooperatives, the work they do, and the challenges they face. I'm your host, Scott Hoffman. These days, cooperatives have access to nearly unlimited amounts of data from their systems that they can use to help serve their members. But how do you create a strategy to optimize bringing in all of this information and presenting it without being overwhelmed by it? Earlier this year, we sat down at NRECA's TechAdvantage conference and Expo to talk about trends and opportunities for co-ops with NRECA's Venkat Banunarayanan, who's on our business and technology strategies team, and John Hewa, who at the time was vice president of corporate services at Virginia's Rappahannock Electric Cooperative. He's now their CEO. Here's that interview. John, Venkat, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Sure.
Okay, so Venkat, walk us through what is the data transformation that's going on? Where's it coming from? Where's it going?
Sure. Thanks, Scott. The data trend is kind of going on for three different reasons. One is the roles of the utilities are changing. It used to be, utilities supply electricity, keep the lights on, and then that's pretty much it. Be reliable, be resilient, of course, be cost-effective and safe. Those are the traditional roles of the utilities, but now that's morphing or that's changing into adding on more roles. You want to be sustainable, you want to be clean, you want to be flexible, you want to be cyber secure. All of that requires data. All of that requires data analytics. The second thing that's changing is the consumer makeup. So what was yesterday's consumers' expectations are not what's going to be today's consumers' expectations or tomorrow's consumers' expectations. So again, there is an increasing need to know more about your consumer member, to know what their expectations are, what do they value, what is important to them. That requires data in terms of segmenting your market, in terms of understanding your customers' implicit and explicit needs. And then, of course, there's always cost pressures. When you make an investment into the grid infrastructure, how can you leverage the maximum value for that investment now and for the next 5 or 10 years? Because technology is improving at an extremely rapid rate. So what you thought an infrastructure that will last for like 15 years now may last only for 5 years because it becomes obsolete much faster, and therefore you need to leverage your investment and maximize your value from that investment much sooner. Again, data is the solution. So those are three trends that are really changing the way we look at data and really giving us reasons for doing more data analytics and data science.
Okay, and walk us through a little bit. You're talking about downline devices, you're talking about meters, you're talking about all kinds of devices that have been put onto the grid as part of the grid evolution. That data comes into the co-op. What happens to it there? How does it become usable to the co-op?
Sure, and I got to tell you, co-ops, utilities, and especially co-ops are very well positioned in terms of creation of data. Why? Because they already have the assets on their systems, on their grid. Now we're talking about SCADA. We're talking about automated metering infrastructure, AMI, the smart meters. Now we're talking about outage management systems, geographical information systems, GIS, and then customer information systems.
Co-ops are leaders in all of those realms because of the geography of their territory, because of their commitment to serving their members, things like that.
Absolutely. Take AMI, for example. What is the number one reason why co-ops install AMI? To avoid truck rolls, reduce costs to their consumers. So it's a great point because the reasons for which co-ops installed all those assets, put in all those grid assets, now co-ops are in a position to leverage even more value from those assets because of the data that they gather. Now you asked what happens, in terms of the data transition, data pathway once they get the data. Take AMI, for example. Now you get the data from AMI, what can you do with it? Well, you can do a lot of things with it. There's a lot of what we call use cases. You can find out more on a granular fashion, on a feeder or even a lateral granularity, what kind of line losses I'm looking at. Now, if you want to reconnect, disconnect a system, AMI is going to tell you that. Now, if you want to understand the load in a consumer, what kind of load? If the consumer has solar, if a consumer has storage, or if a consumer has EV, well, by looking at your AMI data, you can get more information about that. So it's a lot of different ways. Once the data comes in, you can use it. Another example is taking your AMI data and blending it with your GIS and OMS data. The current trend in data analytics and data science is not to look at each source of data in isolation, but combine different sources of data to get more insights than you would achieve if you looked at each one of them in isolation.
Okay, John, tell us a little bit about Rappahannock. I mean, you've been very aggressive and very kind of proactive on not only getting these devices onto your lines and getting the data back in, but actually using it to help your members. Talk a little bit about that.
Sure thing. We're a distribution cooperative. We're in Virginia. We serve portions of 22 counties between Washington, D.C. and Richmond, and we have 17,000 miles of infrastructure, of power lines, over 100 substations. So we've got a wonderful employee team working to serve our members. Our team does a great job with that, and what we're really benefiting from is the opportunity to turn data insights into value. That is ultimately our objective with data, and I thought Venkat did a great job of talking about where data comes from the grid, but our objective is to take that data, make sure that it's secure, it's accessible, it's delivered well, to use strong IT systems to support that delivery for employee and other consumption. But ultimately, the goal is to turn that data and transition and transform that data and those insights into value. For instance, if you take AMI data, of course, you're driving the billing and the metering system with it. But on top of that, we are now working to, and we very successfully merged our GIS data, our feeder circuit information with the AMI information, and we can start to look at everything from system planning and system design to capacity needs. We can now begin to roll out advanced rates through that data and the granularity of that data out of our meter data management system. But we're also being very successful in taking our meter data management and our outage management system, pushing that into our GIS platform, and now we're driving our capital and maintenance budget based on feeder circuit performance. And so for electric co-op, it's a very tangible opportunity to take data that otherwise would potentially not be optimized, would not be leveraged, to turn that data into informing where we spend investment dollars and where we make the new capital investments on the grid.
And take 2 seconds and talk about how that operational side, if you're a member on the other side of the meter, how do you see that? How does that play out for you?
So we're keenly focused on member satisfaction, whether it's our ACSI score or our JD Power results. And beyond that, just member feedback. We want to know how our members feel. We want to make sure that they understand how dedicated the co-op is to making sure that their experience is very outstanding. So in doing that, as we gain data, we can begin to look at anomalies on the system. Maybe it's a power quality issue such as a voltage issue during certain times of the year. We can more proactively address that from a maintenance perspective. If we're capturing information such as blinks or outage experience through our outage management system, then we can begin to see that a particular feeder circuit has experienced an abnormally high level of disruption. So we can reach out to those members and first of all tell the members, we understand, we know that there may be an issue here. We're using our data to prioritize your needs, and we're working that into our maintenance plans and our capital reinvestment plans to make sure that they've got the reliability that they've come to expect from our co-op.
Right. Venkat, talk a little bit about how this trend developed. I mean, we know that there was a surge in smart grid deployments back probably 10 years ago. Tell us a little bit about how that transitioned to where we are today in this kind of data transformation.
The data trend has been some time coming, but it's definitely accelerated due to the advances in technology. I mean, you are right, Scott. One of the turning points really for utilities in general was the capability that was kind of uncovered by doing the smart meters. Essentially, a smart meter kind of gives you a lot more flexibility, a lot more insight into a customer's load profiles, and doesn't just give you the consumption, kilowatt hours. It can tell you voltage. It can tell you a lot more data points at that point of connection of consumer to the grid. The smart meters give co-ops the opportunity to understand a lot more detail about the consumption patterns of the consumer. So they can go to the consumer and say, and John gave an excellent example, in terms of looking at reliability. Now you can look at it and say, okay, well, look, your AC and your heater is running at the same time. We see that. Or you have a sudden spike in your heating consumption, which you should not have, and maybe your emergency heat is on inadvertently. Check that out. Or there's a freon leak in your system, and therefore your AC is useless. So you can see all of that.
And John, you're seeing that. That's something that on the ground you're actually able to do.
Absolutely. Our NISC platform, which is the National Information Solutions Cooperative, that platform for us is driving automatic alerts through the Smart Hub, which is the consumer member owner interface. And so we can provide the types of alerts that Venkat is talking about with a consumption threshold that can be set by an account, and then they can determine whether whether or not there may be something unusual with their electrical system at their home or with their appliances. Another example where we're just taking data and turning it into something very valuable for our membership would be our outage text alerts. We have a platform that informs our members via text. They can subscribe to be notified when we detect an outage through our advanced metering. And so that's a real benefit. Members may be traveling or they may be at home, and just the fact that their co-op sends them an alert to let them know, we understand, we know your power's off, we acknowledge that it's off, and now we're working on it. That really boosts confidence and really builds the trust and the relationship between the co-op and the members.
And that's something that people may not even realize is data. They probably see that as, well, of course they can see it, it's their system, but this is actually revolutionary. This is something that's a reality only in the last decade.
Yeah, what we're getting into here is a really fantastic era of being able to really turn these insights. I mean, first of all, the ability to get insights because the data is now available. For the first time, it's available at a level that we've never had access to before. But now the ability to process that data and turn it into insights is stronger. And there's so many platforms. One of the things I think co-ops have to particularly think about is staffing for this. And can a co-op justify the investment in a data scientist or a data analyst team? These are really important investments that need to be made. And then after that investment made, it's really the organization's culture. And it needs to start at the top, but the organizational culture of really making data-driven decisions. We have this capability now at our fingertips. It's a great opportunity to optimize what we do. And when I say optimize, I mean, increase reliability, improve the economics, but really ultimately improve the members' experience with us. And so this is really a wonderful time, and I think it's a great time for co-ops to really dig in deep and start to understand how they can bring that data to life and the true value of those insights.
And if I can add one thing, going off on what John said, this is indeed a great time for co-ops to think about data. Now, how can a small co-op who may not have the resources do this? What is happening right now in the industry is that there's a big ecosystem that's developing in terms of companies partnering with utilities to be able to offer services such as the ones that John is talking about in terms of creating more insights and value from data. So a smaller co-op who may not have the resources need not do everything by themselves. So they have the ability to leverage other partners that are out there.
And Venkat, I would just add to that, the advancements in cloud computing, and not just the advancements, but the confidence that's grown in cloud solutions and utility confidence in cloud solutions, that's an outstanding way to leverage partnerships in terms of a smaller organization being able to have access to really high quality data processing, data analysis, and systems that help bring those insights for really good business decision making.
That's a great point. We'll hear more on this, but first a word from our sponsor.
Along Those Lines is made possible by IP Keys Power Partners, who wants you to know that IP Keys is revolutionizing how data is used in the electric utility industry. Artificial and human intelligence converge to predict consumption based not only on temperature changes, but also humidity, severe weather, and geography. Seamlessly switch from renewables like wind and solar power to legacy resources for a more resilient utility. Learn more at www.ipkeyspowerpartners.com.
I'm Karis Dean from Piedmont Electric in Hillsborough, North Carolina. You're listening to Along Those Lines.
Welcome back. We've talked about kind of slicing and dicing this and processing it. Venkat, what do we mean when we say processing it? You're getting oceans of data in from multiple different ways. What does the processing look? And then John, on your side, how do you slice and dice it and say, okay, we need to present this information to our customer service representatives. We need to make sure that our operations and our engineering group gets this. Let's kind of complete that picture from the device down to the co-op.
Sure. Data processing is kind of the first step in terms of preparing the data to be analyzed. So by most estimates, 80% of the effort is spent in cleaning up and processing the data, making sure the data is of high quality, removing any outliers and anomalies or wrong data. Well, identification of anomalies itself is a good exercise, but nevertheless, when you want to use the data for a certain use case, for a certain analytics, you want to make sure that it's consistent, no errors, no gaps, fill in the gaps. All of that is processing data, and that is where most of the effort and cost comes into play. So that is a necessary first step. I mean, we all have heard the term garbage in, garbage out. Mm-hmm. So we want to make sure what we put in is not garbage in, and spending the time and money and the effort necessary to make sure we process it correctly. And then there is a second aspect to processing. One is, of course, the cleaning and quality checking. The second is putting the data in a format that is readily usable by the data analytics tool. And that we call connectivity, meaning that if a data analytics tool queries a database, am I going to get it in the correct format needed? needed. That also takes quite some initial work to do before we can run the analytics tools on it. So that together is processing, and that's where really making sure we get it right is extremely essential.
Okay, so you've cleaned the data, you've processed it into a usable package. John, what do you do on your end where you're able to take that data and put it on the platforms that your people can actually use to help your members?
Great question. From the co-op operational perspective, it starts with policy and ensuring that you've got the integrity in the data is pure. Venkat mentioned some of these, that the hygiene of the data is there, the maintenance, but also going beyond that, data ethics issues, data privacy issues, just ensuring that the data is secure and it is used in the right ways with the right access level for the right employees and for the membership. So our objective then is to take the data and ensure that it's pure, ensure that those gaps are filled in the ways that are necessary, and develop this single version of the truth. And then ensure that our utilizations and our value streams all point back to that kind of single version. Now there's multiple values, there's multiple truths, if you will, that are coming out of this, but we're pointing back to a single true version of the data. And so whether it's billing data or other operational data, part of what we have to do, part of what the challenge is for co-ops is to determine how to bring that data to the right business units, to be careful to not provide more access than is needed, but at the same time, make sure there's a right balance in the organization to make sure that the data is getting in the hands of decision makers and business units or departments that need that information for the kinds of programs they're shaping up. And so that's really the objective in the architecture of the data plan. We have to make sure that that balance is achieved and that it's secure in every way, but that we've struck the right balance in terms of making it available to our employees and any partners we're working with.
That's a good point. And you're talking about like software platforms. So if you have customer service representatives, you have a platform where it's going to pull in this data and it's going to present it in a way that is usable on its face immediately for that particular business unit.
Exactly. One thing that we have to remember is that this data is a corporate asset. I mean, in this context, it's a cooperative asset. But it's just like any other asset that the co-op owns. Buildings, infrastructure, substations. There is tremendous and growing value in the data. And it has to be cared for, and it has to be very much respected in terms of the way we operationalize the data.
One thing I want to add, if I may, to John's point on this data privacy is that it's very important for any cooperative who is using the data to be able to explain their data security and privacy strategies to their consumer members. They need to have something that is very clear and explainable and makes sense. And that goes with what John was saying.
Yeah, our team has done a great job of developing dashboards. We have reader boards around the co-op offices, but everyone's got these at their desktop as well. So we've really begun to bring to life the results of special initiatives, the results of our data, whether it's reliability or maybe it's a vegetation management goal for the year or a special initiative goal. We're bringing this data in, we're working to put it in the right presentation form and then push it out to our employees so that they understand week by week, day by day, in some cases, moment by moment, where we stand with respect to the dashboard or performance of the cooperative. So the timeliness of this information is also really critical.
Yeah, give a sense of the things a co-op would have to do to understand some of the concerns of their member in a pre-data world, where you would have to someone would have to walk into the office, right, or send you a letter. Talk a little bit about how it used to be and how far we've come.
Well, going back, first of all, the outages were generally at one time only detected by phone calls or in a storm event, maybe even a member knocking on the door, literally, of the co-op. Today, we've got advanced meters that are alerting us to those outages, and we've got multiple intake portals, whether it's call center over the web, whether it's through a mobile app. There are multiple intake portals, and some of those are automated and some of those are still member-driven. So that, to begin with, in an outage event, that's totally changed kind of the relationship in terms of the co-op's ability to detect something and to respond. So now we've got quicker detection through more portals. So now we're able to run predictions through analytics. We're able to run predictions on which device might have failed. Or we may even get an actual indicator from a device that has opened up on the line and has been the point where the outage is isolated. So now we can direct crews to that location. But then we're using the mapping platform and we know how many consumers are off. And we can send them a text and we can tell them, we know your power is out. Oh, by the way, we think it's going to take 2.5 hours to get the power back on. And so these are all the results of this data-driven environment and co-ops being successful in starting to operationalize the data in new ways. And this trend will continue, but all of that works to build a lot more confidence with the membership. There are issues that occur on the power grid, and so when we can keep our members informed, that's going to improve their satisfaction and their performance, and they own the co-op. So we want to make sure that as owners of the co-op, they understand the status of their service and what we're doing, what our team is doing to make sure that they're cared for.
There are co-ops out there who are not necessarily either sold on the data revolution or have not gone all in yet. What are some of the impediments, Venkat, that you're seeing to building that business model around the data transformation?
First and foremost, it's important for a co-op, for the decision makers in the co-op to understand the value of doing something. And in this, data is no different in that case. Start small. Start in a small project, show that, okay, if I use data to do this, look, the decision making is much better now, much more justified, you get more value out of it, and so on. So that is one. Now, assuming you cross that impediment, then the question then becomes, what additional infrastructure I need to be able to make use of the data? A lot of the co-ops may not get the AMI data, for example, in AMI, in the format or in the time interval that's needed for them to do the analytics. And a lot of the data analytics require a certain amount of data, which the co-ops may not get. So, which means there's an additional communications infrastructure required, and there is additional data storage and recollection and retrieval infrastructure required. So, how do you justify the cost of that? The third one is resources. I mean, data scientist is probably the first or the second hottest job in the nation, next to cyber. So getting somebody hired, making them come to maybe a rural area of the country and working on data is not the easiest thing to do. So that's where partnerships can be helpful. So it all starts with understanding the value and then making sure you take it from there. But the most important thing is the change in culture, data-driven culture. How do we instill that? It starts with asking the question for every decision, what data do we have to support this? Now, once we have that change, and this is really driven top-down from the CEO on downwards, once that change is made, then it becomes easier and easier to do more data analytics and incorporate that into decision making.
Yeah. John, did you have to work through some of those impediments to get to where you are?
Oh, I think all organizations are on this data migration in terms of bringing it to life, making sure that their organization has the culture that can really bring value. You know, I agree very much with what Venkat said. Beyond the policy, to have at the executive level, to have team members that understand either literally how to work with the data or understand the value of the data at play in the organization, and then really to staff for it. Whether it's staffed or not, one way or another, the organization needs the information. And so if it's not staffed and centralized, then it's kind of distributed, but those costs are still there, and the implications of not having the data are costly as well. So to build the business case, if you will, for staffing and for some of the platform investments, that's getting easier to do because there's so much more we can do in terms of bringing the data to life, in terms of the way we can operationalize it, and in terms of the way we build insights that are actually driving some really serious dollars for co-ops, whether it be at the power supply side in the market or whether it be truck rolls and efficiency of their employee teams.
Right. So where's it all going? I'll ask you both. Is there an end game? Is there something that you're seeing on the horizon that's very transformational to the way we do business in the near term? Get your crystal balls out.
Well, okay, I'll start. To me, the frontier here is what I call data-enabled technologies. There's a lot of technologies out on the horizon which can work only if you give data to them. So we are moving from technologies providing data to technologies enabled by data. And that's what I see on the horizon. And what does that mean? That means more automation. That means automating a lot of the functions that historically has been done by humans. And to the extent of, in some cases, autonomous decision making. And autonomous decision making, we all know about self-driving cars that are coming at us fairly quickly. Think about that and extend it to self-operating utilities. That requires data like we have never seen before, and that's what is in my crystal ball on the horizon.
I couldn't agree more. When you look at what our consumers are expecting of us and the transitions that are occurring with distributed resources, but if you kind of just look at photovoltaics and the growth of PV and the number of members that the typical co-op has now that are making that an investment at the commercial or residential level, you look at the increasing and very much ramping up adoption of electric vehicles, and then take a technology that's emerging quickly like energy storage. All of these have very, very significant, they're very significantly enabled by data, but they also have very significant data implications. And the co-op model is so well positioned to work with the membership, to bring these technologies to bear, to get these technologies working for the member, but then at the co-op level, to take the data that comes out of these systems and these needs and to use it in a way that leverages it so that we can continue to provide the right kind of service, very high quality service, but ensure that a new technology such as electric vehicle charging is a real benefit for us and isn't a reliability challenge, and it doesn't create a problem. So the situational awareness that will come from the data opportunity is really essential for us as co-ops to make sure that we stay on top of our game.
That's awesome. John, Venkat, thanks so much for being on the program.
Thanks, Scott. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Scott.
Thanks as well to our sponsor, IP Keys, and to you, our listeners. For this and other podcasts, visit our website, electric.coop. Until next time, I'm Scott Hoffman.
I'm John Lowry. I'm retired from the Association of Illinois Electric Cooperatives in Springfield, Illinois. Thanks for listening to Along Those Lines. Subscribe and rate us on your favorite podcast app.